Scott, formerly of the University of Florida, now with the University of Oregon. We're very pleased to have him. He's quite an expert in the field of behavior intervention plans, and he had a very, very long trek to get here yesterday from Oregon. Lots of delays due to flights, so we're very happy he could join us. So thank you.
All right. Thanks. Good morning. It's a nice big group. Nice to see you all here. I have several tasks that I need to accomplish today. One of them is to stay on schedule so that you all get to leave on time. Second one is to cover all the material that I want to cover within that allotted time. And third is to try to keep you awake in this closed-in little room for a whole day. So I'm going to try to accomplish the third of those by hopefully talking about things that are somewhat interesting to you. And second, by giving you some chances to kind of practice with some things. So I have with me today a whole bunch of little videos that I'm going to show you of kids having problems and teams talking about what to do about it. And I'm going to use those to lead you through a sequence of events that I think make sense to deal with kids with challenging behaviors. Now, you may or may not do exactly the same little sequence that I'm going to show you today, and that's perfectly okay. What I'm showing you is an example, and what I hope that you can take from those examples are some big ideas. So you could say, when we want to know why this kid is having that problem, we need to do these kinds of things. So I'm going to show you one way to do it, but I want you to extrapolate from that. There are other ways we could do the same thing, but that piece has to be there. So I am going to lead you through in a specific way, but that's not because I think it has to be done exactly the way I'm showing it to you. It's just an example. What I want to do with our day today is I want to start the morning off with a logic, with a foundation. I have a particular way I like to talk about positive behavior support, and so I'm going to give you kind of an overview of a way to think about it. There are two reasons for me doing what I'm going to do right now. One is, I think the more times you hear it in a different way, the easier it is to understand. So what we sometimes say is repetition builds fluency. The second reason why I'm going through it again is because I really think a lot of what we do with PBS is trying to talk other people into doing things. And what I want to give you this morning is a logic, something to stand on when you say, here's why I think we should do this. So I'm going to start you off with something I'm sure you're all sick of seeing. The triangle. And here's what we've said about this triangle. It's based on theory. We don't know for certain that things are going to fall out like this. We're guessing. And we're guessing based upon a whole bunch of data from mental health and business. And those literatures have told us if you have some sort of an institution, whether it be a place of work, a home, a church, a club, an organization, a school maybe, that most of the people in that organization will do whatever it is we're set out to do without us really harassing them too much. But there will be a group of people who need help. These are people who generally forget, weren't listening in the first place, are distracted by other things, or don't understand. Those are people we can help really easily by giving them reminders, by teaching them better, by doing other little things. But then we've got a group of people at the very top who aren't going to do what we ask no matter what. And they're not doing it because they forgot or because they weren't listening. They're doing it because they just don't feel like doing it. That's a group of people that will need not just reminders, but will need a lot of assistance and a lot of programming from us to make them be successful. And what our literature told us from a long time ago is those red people at the top, we don't change them very well. We're not very good at that. But we have to try. So here's what PBS says. The difference with PBS and everything else is simply this. PBS says instead of going in and attacking yellow and red, Instead of going in and saying, how do we get yellow to be better? And while we're doing that, red is driving us nuts. So we leave yellow alone and we go over to red and we start hammering and punishing on the red. And while we're doing that, the yellow surrounds us and starts turning red. And so we go back to yellow. Well, while we're doing all this yellow and red that's not working, green is starting to deteriorate. So here's PBS. PBS says your first step is to go in and make green as big as you can possibly make it. If you could stretch this green up to 90, yellow and red have to be smaller. There's only room for 100% in this pyramid. So if we can make kids more successful from the very first second they walk through the door, you will have fewer problems throughout the year. Because the bigger green gets, the smaller your problems will be. Here's what our data says for schools, and it falls out the way the theory would have predicted. These are schools that are not using PBS. In the average school that's not using PBS, elementary school, just about what we thought. It's about 82% of the kids get 0 or 1 discipline referral. So these are kids that have, at the most, 1 problem during the year. We'll call them successful. Our yellow zone are kids that get from 2 to 5 referrals during a year, 10.5. So maybe a little bit smaller than we thought it might be, but it's in there. But the red zone surprises us. In the average elementary school, the red zone is bigger than we thought it would be. It's 8%. And remember, this is important. Knowing that you have 8% kids in the red zone right now says something about what's going to happen to those kids tomorrow, next year, and all the way through school, actually. In other words, if you can predict a kid is at the red zone right here in elementary school, we'll predict that kid probably isn't going to graduate from high school. Which means we've got our work cut out for us to fix that. But we aren't very good at fixing those kids. We don't have good data that says we're really good at that. We try, we've got good stuff, but it doesn't work for a big number of these kids. So what our best hope is to not let kids get into that red part in the first place. Because when we move on to elementary school, those kids in the red are still there, but some of the kids from the yellow have joined them. And at the middle school level, we now have a much smaller number of kids that we would call successful. In the average middle school, only 71% of our kids get 0 or 1 referral. That red zone has exploded, almost 12%. This is what that tells us. Kids that we identify with problem behaviors, red zone level at middle school, will not be with us in high school. They don't stick around. For whatever reason, we told them to leave or they left on their own, they're gone. So here's our data at high school. The red zone looks pretty good because those kids aren't with us anymore. Now the problem with this is those kids are failures. Now not every kid that drops out of high school is a failure, but the kids we're talking about, they are. And we know some things about these kids. If you're one of these kids that was red zone here, you're not in high school. You are, and this is what the Centers for Disease Control tells us, you are involved in more automobile accidents. You're involved with more illicit drug use. You're far more likely to be involved in social services, to go to jail, to be a single parent. There's just a whole bunch of things that you're more likely to have if you came out of the red zone in middle school. We've got great data now that's saying things like the best predictor we have of a kid in 6th grade being in the red zone is a kid with more than 3 referrals in 3rd grade. We can predict failure down the road by failure now, which means that no matter where you are, early childhood, elementary school, middle school, or high school, we have to find the kids that are failing right now and turn it around, because once it gets going too far, we don't have a shot at it. This is data on kids in elementary schools that are using PBS. What does that mean? What are they doing different? They are figuring out what they want their kids to do. They are teaching it to their kids. They are doing it as a system. Everybody's on the same page. And they're collecting data. 4 things. PBS, you could boil down to those 4 things. In schools that are using PBS, and this is data that looks at almost 300,000 kids. And it says in these schools at the elementary level, 88 in the green. So if you look at green first, when green goes from 82 to 88, success rates went up by 6%. That means for every 100 kids in your school, 6 are successful this year that weren't last year. What does that mean? It means we can't predict any ill effects. When the yellow shrinks just a little bit, and it shrunk just very little bit, it says we can predict kids that aren't going to be in need of big help next year. When red shrinks, and it shrank from 8 to 3, what that says is, and this is I think the most important thing we found, for every 100 kids in your school, there are 5 that last year we would have predicted are going to drop out of high school, go to jail, be involved in social services, etc., that this year we can't predict that for. And that is the huge benefit we get. But notice that we did not get that by going after the red and the yellow. We did it by teaching every kid in the school what positive behavior is, by facilitating it through all of us, and by using our data to make decisions where it's working and not working to make our changes. So we have to continue to look at this like something that is early for later. Here's the average middle school in schools that are using PBS. It's still not good. It's only 75 for the green. But that red has dropped from almost 12 down to 9. So again, there's a group of kids that last year we could have predicted are going to drop out when they get to high school that we won't predict that for now. Statistically speaking, that's not a predictability for those kids. But our work is cut out for us in middle school. We've got a lot of kids with problems. And all of our data says kids in middle school have a lot of problems. No matter where you are, no matter what's going on, middle school kids, a concoction of hormones and whatever else is going on, they have more problems. When we get to high school, here's a hard sell. Somehow we have to sell to the high schools, if you use PBS, all those kids with problems will stay in your school, and that's a good thing. And sometimes people don't think that sounds like a good thing. So you're telling me, if I do PBS, all those kids that are the biggest pain will be here more. Yes, that's what we're telling you. So why should I want to do PBS? Well, I think we have to look at the logic again. When those kids aren't there, where are they? They're burglarizing your house right now. That's where they are. Just because they're not in school doesn't mean they're not having problems, and it still costs us money if money is the issue. To put a kid in jail, for instance, in correctional schools cost, on the average, $66,700 and some odd dollars a year for one kid. I think we could keep a kid in the public school system and treat them very well for a lot less than that. So it's not a cost-effective solution. My first jobs that I ever had were working in correctional schools. And I can tell you what kids learn in correctional schools. It's a trade school for criminals, if you will. So I don't think it's a solution to say, well, we'll just get rid of those kids. We're getting rid of them only for the time being. It'll come back to haunt us. So it makes more sense for us to say, how do we keep these kids in school and make them successful? It isn't expensive, and it isn't that difficult, because we've got lots of examples of that happening. Here's what people need to hear. Let's go back to that elementary level. That 3% of kids up there at the very top of your triangle, they make up 35% of your problems. So take account of all the office referrals you've had this year, all the suspensions you've had this year, all the issues you've spent with discipline. 35% of all of those issues came from 3% of your kids, which means that every time you lower that number in the red by 1%, you do away with 10% of your problem behaviors. And every time you do away with 10% of the problems you deal with, you've saved yourself a ton of time. Because we know that the average office referral takes about 20 minutes. So every time one of those problems goes away, you save 20 minutes. And if we can cut red from 8% to 3%, we have schools that are saving multiple days worth of time during the year. Yellow and red together make up 70% of all your problems in elementary school. So in elementary school, every time a yellow or a red kid is made successful by the system, it saves us time. So the logic is, yeah, we're only working on a very few kids. Why should we spend a bunch of time working on just this few kids? Because working on that few kids saves us the most time. But that group of kids to work on will be the smallest when we start with green. At the middle school, red zone kids at the middle school make up 9% of the school, make up more than 50% of your problems. So if you could cut your red zone, let's say in half, you right there, got rid of 25% of all the problems that you see in your entire school, just by cutting down that small group of kids. What we also want to think about is that yellow group. What do we want to do with that yellow group? We want to prevent them from becoming red. And every time we do something to make a yellow zone kid be successful, we save a big chunk of time. At the high school, yellow and red combined make up 80% of all your problems. If you didn't have yellow and red zone kids at the high school, you wouldn't have any problems. It's probably the same at every school. The problem is, for us, if you just get rid of them, you will have fewer problems in your school. But we don't create life outcomes for those kids. In fact, what we know is when these kids fail and drop out, they become the parents of the next group of kids that are exactly the same. And for some reason, these people seem to have more children than the rest of us. So somehow, we have to keep those kids here and make them as successful as we possibly can. So this is the way I want to talk about this. Discipline. We're here really to talk about behavior, to talk about discipline. What is discipline? Here's the definition that I want to use. Anything that we do that makes our kids more successful, that's discipline. So good instruction is discipline. Reminding kids what you want them to do is discipline. Having adults stationed at different places in the hallway to be able to see kids and see what they're doing is discipline. Letting kids know when they've done things the right way is discipline. Letting kids know when they've done things the wrong way is discipline. When I first moved to the University of Florida several years ago, one of the things that I had to do for the first time ever was teach an undergraduate class in behavior management, classroom management. So I'd never taught all general ed undergrads before. I'd always had special ed grad students. So I've got a classroom with 35 19-year-old wannabe teachers. And I walk in and I figure what I want to do right off the bat is get them engaged in talking about behavior. So I show them a little video that I'm going to show you later today. And this video has a 4th grade kid humming really loud and tapping his pencil to get the teacher's attention. These 19-year-old students that I have are horrified at this video. One girl really raised her hand, very disgusted, and said to me, "Why are you making us watch these things? We're not going into special ed. We won't have kids like this." And it occurred to me, I don't think they know what they're in for. So I said this to them. I said, well, bear with me. I mean, yeah, God forbid that someday a kid would make a noise in your room. But if by some horrible circumstance that did happen, what would you do? And I said, tell you what, I want you guys to get in little groups and I want you to get together and I want you to brainstorm things you would do if on your first job a kid was making noises. And so they get together and they all went off and I gave them 10, 15 minutes. They came back and I said, okay, what do you got? This is the list that they gave to me from that class. Send them home. Send them to the principal. Put them out in the hall. Time out. Special desk at the back of the room. Put them in another teacher's room. There are all these things. some of which are things that would really happen and some of which are pretty far-fetched, but all of them, their entire set of things they said they could do were, here's what we'll do when they do it wrong. None of them said anything about, well, I wouldn't let that happen in the first place. Of course, you can't not let it happen, but we could make it less likely. And no one even mentioned the prevention part. To them, discipline was wait for a problem, punish it. Now, let me say this right off the top. You can't teach any behavior without reinforcement and punishment. It can't be done. Reinforcement and punishment are parts of instruction. What we've done is we've skewed the definitions of those two things so badly that people only think of two things. When you say reinforcement, people think of you got to give kids candy and tokens and money and goodies. And when you say punishment, they think you've got to send them out or you've got to hit them or you've got to somehow confine them. Those are examples of reinforcement and punishment. But there are a whole bunch of other examples that are much simpler. Here's what I like to do for the logic. Let's say we're teaching 2 plus 2. So this is the first time we've ever talked about it. And I walk into the classroom and I walk up to a student and I say to that student, what's 2 plus 2?
4.
Student says 4. What would you do if you're the teacher? You'd say something to them. Or would you give them a piece of candy? Would you give them some money for saying 4? No, you would say, yes, correct, good for you, excellent. You'd say something. And you know what that thing is that you're saying? Reinforcement. Here's the definition of reinforcement. Anything you do right after a behavior that makes that behavior more likely under those circumstances in the future. When we say 2 plus 2, there's the circumstance. We want 4. So when she says 4, we do something to make that happen again. That's reinforcement. And none of us are giving them candy or tokens or money for doing that. We are giving them feedback. That's the reinforcer. But when we get to behavior, suddenly everybody thinks, oh, it's got to be money, it's got to be candy, it's got to be tokens. Those are examples, but it doesn't have to be. And in fact, I would argue it shouldn't be. I think sometimes we need those, but really, we want feedback. But here's what happens. We get out in the hallway and we've asking these kids to walk and they've been running every day and running into each other. And today they're walking and I say, did you tell them good job? And this is what people say to me. No, because I expect that. See, but I expected 4. When I said 2 plus 2, I expected 4. So here's the logic. I should be doing this. Say 4 again. What's 2 plus 2?
4.
Okay, I can't respond to that because I expected it. Will she know that she got the right answer? I guess you could think, as long as he didn't hit me, it must have been the right answer. But the problem with thinking like that is, I don't really think I want to be here to find out if I got the wrong answer. And exactly that is what happens. Kids start saying, I'm unsure whether I can do this or not, and failing isn't fun, so what I'm going to do is invent a behavior to allow me to get away from having to find out whether I'm doing it right or wrong. So they develop a really simple behavior. They call you a name. So we say, math, 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 and she says, screw you. We're not talking about math anymore. I say, all right, you're out. And she's going, whew, don't have to do math. I just reinforced the problem behavior. I did something right after that behavior that made that behavior more likely to occur in the future. Now let's go to the punishment side. I want you to say 5 when I give you the answer to this. Okay, I'm going to say 2 plus 2. She's going to say 5. Let's see, what should we do? What's 2 plus 2?
5.
Not 5, idiot! Okay, I punished that for her. Now, I'll bet you, because here's our definition of punishment, anything you do after a behavior that makes that behavior under those circumstances less likely in the future. So next time I come over and say what's 2 plus 2, I'll bet she's not going to say 5. But what's the problem? She's not going to want to say anything at all. Whenever you use punishment, you get side effects. The side effects of punishment are escape, avoidance, withdrawal, and if those don't work, aggression. So now what's going to happen is she's going to say, I don't like answering questions for that teacher. In fact, I don't even want to go to that class. I don't even want to come to school because there's a lot of punishment there. But you have to punish, or how would they know it was wrong? I could do this. Say 5 again. I could just decide it's not my job. What's 2 plus 2?
5.
Yeah, whatever. It's not my job. I don't care. I'm the reading teacher. I don't care if you say 5. What have I done to her if I say that? I would argue I have taught her that something wrong is right. I've mistaught her. Why don't I just go around saying 2 plus 2 is 5 to everybody? What would be the harm if I just taught all the kids in my class that 2 plus 2 equals 5? What would be the harm in that? Okay, my test scores wouldn't be good. But think beyond your classroom. I've set them up to be failures everywhere they go because it isn't 5. So let's say we've got a kid walking down the hallway and I see a kid doing the wrong thing. We're not supposed to put our feet up on the furniture. And I come walking down the hall and here's a kid with his foot up on the furniture, messing with his shoe. And I look at that kid and I say to myself, I'm a reading teacher. I'm not the behavior teacher. That's none of my business. What's the problem with me thinking like that? I have taught that kid that it's okay. Kids learn by the way adults react when they behave. That's part of teaching, is the feedback we give them. So no feedback at all still teaches something. So I can't say my job's to teach academics, not behaviors, because I'm sorry, if you are in a school, you're an adult, and you have a pulse, you teach behaviors, whether you like it or not. So we've got to get people to all think, well, what is it that we want our kids to do, and how do we respond to that? Here's what I think all of us would do when she says 5. What's 2 plus 2?
5.
Oh, it's not 5. Stop right there. That was a punishment. I told her that what she did was not correct. I did not say, good for you, yes, you're right. The simple fact that I said, no, that's wrong, is a punishment. That's what we do for academics when they get it wrong. We punish it with correction. So here's, oh, it's not 5, because see, we got 2 plus 2, count those up.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So 2 plus 2 equals
4.
Great, good job. Now what I did was, and this is what everybody does for academics, they got it wrong, so I punished it. I retaught it, and I gave them an opportunity to be successful with it. So what I've done is I've turned a failure into a success. All I get out of that is a 1-to-1 ratio, which isn't going to be enough, but I can somehow get in there and account a little bit for that punishment by making another success. So let's go back to our kid who's putting his feet up on the furniture. He puts his feet up on the furniture. Should I go in and slap him? Feet off the furniture! Knothead, loser! Give me 50 laps. Give me 25 push-ups. There's a punishment. But if we were treating behavior the way we know works for academics, what would you do for that kid? You say, is that what we're supposed to do? Why isn't it what we're supposed to do? What should we do instead? That's right. Could you show me how to do that the right way? Thank you. I like the way you're doing that. Could you keep doing that? You would tell them what's wrong and why, reteach it, and have them demonstrate it, and you tell them right. That's the corrective sequence we want for behavior. And yet, even though every single one of us does that for academics, a whole bunch of people think that we can't do that for behavior. They'll say, when they do it right, I expect that, I'm not going to say anything. And when they do it wrong, they need to get hit hard for doing it wrong so they'll remember. But nobody would say those same things for academics because they know it doesn't work. If you tried to teach your whole class just by saying, you should just feel good about doing it and I'm not going to tell you about it, and when they did it wrong, you harshly punished them, it would not work. So we've got to get people to see that the logic is, we need to be thinking more about prevention and less about reaction. But reaction should include positives as well as negatives, but they don't need to be tangible things. Anybody in here, if I said, you're going to have that kid that makes noises in your room as soon as you go to your next classroom, you would all start thinking about, well, what kind of rules do I want to set up in the classroom to make sure that kid understands so he knows what the rule is on the noise-making thing. And what kind of routine should I set up to make it less likely he'll have the opportunity to make those noises? And where should I be standing and where should he be sitting? Should we put our kids in rows or in circles? It depends. What do you want your kids to do? We have to think out, how do you arrange what's going on in your classroom to make your kids successful? That's all PBS is, except it's at the school-wide level. Where should I be standing in the hall? How many kids should be in the hall at one time? What have we told that we want them to do when they're out there? Are we saying thanks for walking when we see them doing it the right way, or are we stopping them and correcting them when we see them doing it the wrong way? Effective instruction. PBS is effective instruction. And effective instruction has those same pieces. What do we want to teach? Where's the problem? How will we teach it? How do we make sure that it's consistent and we're giving the same message all the time? And are we monitoring to see if it's working? So you don't just teach reading all year long and then at the very end of the year give a test and go, damn, that kid didn't read this year. We monitor them as we go. Same with behavior. We need to be looking as we go and saying, are problems in the hallway going up or down? Are we making a difference with those rules we set up in the cafeteria? That's why we collect that data, to be able to give us information. And all of you know about the office referral data that we've been looking at. I'll tell you this, office referral data does not tell you whether your school is doing a good job with PBS or not. Office referral data tells you what's going on, when, where, why, so that we can go in and fix it. Office referral data is data we use for formative feedback and playing with things. What I want to know when I say is the school better or not better are things like suspensions, academic scores, attendance rates. What other things would be important outcomes for your kids? That your kids went to the office less is good if that means they stayed in the classroom more, but staying in the classroom more is only good if that means they learned more. If those kids are staying in the classroom more, but while they're there, they're sitting in the corner, we're not any further ahead. So I like the office referrals thing, and I'm going to talk more about it in just a few minutes. But again, I want to come back to the concept that office referrals are the data that we use to make decisions, not the big picture. We can use them for the big picture, but if we use them alone for the big picture, it doesn't tell us everything. For instance, I had a school once who went from horrible numbers of referrals to almost zero. And all of the teachers were really crabby when I went in there all the time. And I was just ecstatic. This is working so well. It's great. You guys are down to zero. And they're grumbling. But one day I said, why are you guys so upset? Things look so well. And they said, yeah, because the principal told us we're not allowed to refer anymore. Is that school better because they have zero referrals? They're just ignoring problems now. They're not better off. So referrals help us, but they aren't the end all of this. Here's what we have to do. Research tells us simply, if you can create an instructional environment wherein your children are successful 4 times more often than they fail, they will keep doing it. This doesn't say if you can create an environment where you give them 5 pieces of candy for every one you take away. This says success. Are they doing it the right way? So when she says 2 plus 2, when I say 2 plus 2 and she says 4 and I say, I didn't say anything, I just give her the thumbs up. But that is a success. You can put that over here on the success side. Now what I have to think out, those rules, routines, arrangements, the rule was simple. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Now what's my routine? I need to get this into a story problem. I need to get this in other ways. I might have some peer groups that are working together. We're going to do a little activity where we're going to need to have some addition to make the activity work. And every time you do 2 plus 2 equals 4, and I walk by and say, nice job, guys, or one of your peers says, wow, this is done right, or you look at it and say, everything checks out, or I put an A on it, or your parents come in and say, great, or every time any of those things happens, it's dropping another success in this bucket. How do you create an environment where your routines and your arrangements make the rule work often enough that the kids are successful 4 times more than they're not? Because when this happens, we can walk away. And that's what we want. We don't want to be here doing this all. I'm not going to follow her around for the rest of her life saying, And what's 2 plus 2 when she goes to the store to add up 2 cans of beans? I want her to do it on her own. How do I get that? I have to make her be successful 4 times more often than she fails so she believes she can do it. So how at the school level do we create environments where kids are successful 4 times more often than they fail? Now some people say to me, I'd love to do this, but that kid never does anything right. We've got a rule, but the kid won't do it. So what are you going to do? My answer is pretty short. Teach. How do you create an environment where they'll get it right? I'm going to use manipulatives if we're doing it in math. I'm going to break it down even further if we're using reading. I'm going to find a different way to teach it. I'm going to peer groups. I'm going to tutor. Those are all routines and arrangements that we use to make the kid get the rule. So if the kids are running in the hall over and over again, if we were to use an instructional approach, we'd say, how do we structure this hallway so that kids don't run as often? How do we put adults in the right places? And how do we put reminders hanging from the ceiling? And how do we talk about it? And how do we... But if you just go from the behavior thing that we typically do, we'll say, well, then we need to start suspending kids for running in the hallway. If I use that logic back here with 2 plus 2, I'd say, well, this kid never does anything right. They keep saying 5. Well, then you need to start suspending them every time they say 5. Well, that just doesn't make sense. Because what you're doing is saying the teaching isn't working, so get rid of the kid. That kid is really having trouble with math. Well, I've got a solution. Let's not teach math this year. Those aren't solutions. They just get us away from the problem for a little bit, and it gets worse while we've escaped it. Our issue is, if all I do is do no teaching, but walk around and say, what's 2 plus 2? And she says, 4. And I say, great. And I walk over the next time and she says, 5. And I say, nope, it's not 5. Count them up. What is it? And she says, oh yeah, 4. All I'm getting is a 1-to-1. And 1-to-1 here won't make that kid be successful. Your kids that are really successful could operate on 1-to-1 for a long time because they believe they'll eventually get it. But kids that have failed, this thing is tipped like this. Those kids that have failed don't believe they're going to get it. And just a few of these bigger than that, it rolls out of control. They start having problems everywhere they go, everything they do. Do not misinterpret this. Remember our definition of reinforcement. Something that happens after a behavior. So some people think, well, I'll just cheat and give all the reinforcers up front at the beginning of the day, and then I can give punishment. So I just go in and say to you, good, 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 good. All right, now I got a punishment in the bank I can use later today. That's not it. You have to actually make a behavior happen that's successful, and then tell them that thing you did, wow, you're good. Good for you.
I have a question.
Okay.
The data that you're using to support this 4-to-1 ratio, is it coming out of general ed population, special ed population? Does it break down differently? Look at different subgroups of kids and the kinds of disabilities, or?
It's a very good question. And to be real honest, I don't know. Because most of this data comes from psychology. So we have several populations, but do those populations really look at the entire range of possibilities? I don't know. My guess would be that it wouldn't matter, except for this. The more of this you've had already, the bigger this gets, the harder it is to turn it around. Because I come in and make you have 3 successes in a row, or 4 or 5, you've still got 100 here that you had in a row before. So in order to make this work, the entire ratio has to be that, not just the ratio for the last 2 minutes. So if you're a kid that's come in from a disadvantaged background where you don't believe you can do it, nobody in your family's ever done it, people in your neighborhood culture don't do it, you walk into school, you immediately start having little failures, everything's stacked up against you, I'm probably not going to be able to put up with very much of this. So what our task becomes for those kids is, we've got to make these even more salient and even more frequent than 4-to-1. For the average kid that's humming along, if you can keep this going, it'll work. But I think you raise some really interesting questions that we just haven't done the research on for anybody to look at. But I think, again, the big picture would be, over a stretch of time, can we get that? And that's another reason for us to look at green zone first. Because if you wait until a kid's red zone before we try to do this, then we've built such a staggered teeter-totter to begin with that it's really difficult to ever get this. Great question. Okay, so here's what we've set up. Here's our problem. We've got a bunch of kids that are the average, 85% or better, look like that. And as time goes by, they learn more and more. They do better and better. We've got a group of kids that are mainly red zone, but also include some yellow zone. Yellow zone's probably in the middle here somewhere. We've got a group of kids that come in and also learn as time goes by, but they don't get better as fast because they don't get 4 to 1. They don't learn as fast. So we try to make them get 4 to 1. The older they get, the more difficult that becomes. I don't mean age-wise, I mean the longer they fail. But that usually ends up meaning age. So here's what we know. According to Hill Walker and his colleagues at the Institute for Violent and Destructive Behavior, show me a kid at 3 years old that has behavior problems that look normatively different than their peers. And at 3 years old, that kid does not know that the alphabet is made of letters that have sounds. Show me a kid with those two issues at 3 years old. If you can't get this line to start moving upward off of this trajectory by the time they get to 2nd grade, statistically speaking, that child is more likely to go to jail than to graduate from high school. That's how quickly that gets out of control. So what that says is, let's not wait until 2nd grade to try to turn it around. When you see a kid at 3 years old with those kind of problems, we do something right now. Because let's say we waited till 2nd grade and somehow we had some magic pill and we gave it to the kid at 2nd grade and it fixed him. What does fix mean? We have absolutely nothing in the world that says we can do this. We don't have that. There is no such thing. The best we have is this. We can mimic the same learning curve that other kids have. So at some point here we fixed you. That would mean we now can get you to learn at the same rate as everybody else. But that doesn't mean you've caught up. So the longer we go before we start doing something, the bigger the gap will be forever. And the gap is important. The gap for a little kid at 2nd grade would be 5 years. So we would predict a kid who's 5 years behind their peers at 2nd grade is a kid that we'll predict ain't gonna make it. But let's say we fixed him at 4 years old, at 4 years behind. So right here we fixed him and we got this. The problem with that is our data says when we get up to elementary middle school, 2 or 3 years behind predicts a kid that's gonna drop out. So even though we feel really good, we fixed this kid 4 years down, when they get up to elementary, they're still gonna blow out. So we can't let them get 4 years down. So we say, we've only got 2 or 3 years. Let's fix them when they're 2 years behind. So at 3 years old, we say, yeah, let them grow out of it. And at 4 years old, we say, yeah, let them grow out of it. And at 5 years old, we say, maybe they're not going to grow out of it. Let's try it. And we do something and it works. And we make it through elementary school. What happens at high school? Where the data says 1 to 2 years behind is our predictor of a kid who's going to drop out. In other words, we have to go to the lowest common denominator here, which is about 1 year. Which means any kid that's 1 year behind is a kid that's at risk of not making it all the way through school. So it doesn't matter if you're at 3 years old, 4 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old, 16 years old, a kid that's behind needs something extra. My teaching certificate's in special ed. I taught special ed classrooms in all different shapes and sizes and varieties, and I'm a professor of special ed. Special ed will not fix this for us, because special ed is not set up in a very smart way. Special ed says, we have to wait until you're so far behind everybody else that we can't possibly fix you before we'll give you some help. And literally the data says exactly that. Our data says, for learning disabilities and reading, for instance, the average age at which we put a kid into a learning disabilities program for reading is also the age at which there's an 88% probability they won't ever get back on track. So don't wait for special ed to fix these problems for us. Special ed is for the kids for whom nothing else works, and that's a stupid way to use it, but that's the way it's being used right now. We can't rely on special ed. We have to say, let's not let the kid get that far behind in the first place. We've got to take it on as a school and not wait for it to become special ed's issue. A special ed's working really hard and doing great things, but we've set them up to be kind of a failure-driven system by only giving them kids for whom we have not great hopes. And that's not to say that there aren't kids in special ed that do well and special ed doesn't do a good job or anything, just that we're not being proactive enough in our use of it according to the data. That's why, if you're familiar with the RTI model, that's why much of special ed is going to an RTI model, which just says, let's start giving interventions early and use those kinds of things to make decisions. But here's what we have to think about. I've just described a pretty ugly situation. It's a very depressing morning so far. And what I've said is the problems are big, they can be changed, but it's going to take a lot of effort by us. And that right there stymies this. And I don't mean that sarcastically, because I've been a teacher. You don't have just these big extra chunks of time during your day that you're thinking, what could I do with this couple of hours that I have every day? So it's not like we could just say, let's use all your spare time to fix this. Instead, we have to find things that work. That's what I'll call logic. What's the things that we know would make a difference for these kids? And we have to balance that with what's something that we have the time, patience, energy, skills to do. Because if you pick something that's really big and really great, but you don't have time to do it, it won't work. People do that. They come up with these great solutions. They're beautiful. They write these plans. They have these big things. And nobody has the time to do any of this stuff. And so it just doesn't really happen. We also see people that do just the opposite. They pick things that are really simple. And everybody does them. But they're so simple they really have no effect. Two examples. One would be the logic. Let's have 4 people in every location of the school to monitor kids. You're probably going to need to triple the number of adults that work in your school next year. If you tripled the number of adults that work in your school and placed people everywhere watching everything that happened, would you predict you'd see fewer problems? Yes. How logical is that? Or how realistic is that? Okay, then that's a stupid idea. So anyone that says, what we're going to do for PBS is have 5 times the number of people working there. I'm going to say I think that's a dumb idea because I don't see it happening. Or you could say, when we walk in the morning, what we're all going to do as a school is we're going to stop and think happy thoughts to all of our problem kids. Very realistic. You could do that simply. Everybody could do it, and I'll bet you could do it every day. I don't think that's very logical. So I want a combination of logic and reality. Something that we think would work, something we can do. And in order to get that, what we're going to probably have to do is get rid of some things that we're doing now that are time-consuming, that aren't giving us a big bang, and replace it with something that's less time-consuming that gives us a bigger bang. Work smarter, not harder, is what we want people to think. PBS should not take you extra time, should not need to be extra money, extra effort. In fact, I'll show you the data. As PBS gets in place and working, you should be saving time. It should save you time overall. But we've got to talk people into that. Why should I do anything different? Here's what I like to show people for the logic on that. This is a Gallup poll taken of over 1 million workers on what makes your place of work a place you like to go every day. What makes your work a good place? This is what adults say they want when they go someplace every day where they're supposed to do something. They like to know exactly what's expected of them. So adults want rules. They want to know what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it. When you go to work, you want to know, what am I supposed to do? Adults like to have all the materials and equipment and the things they need to be able to do things correctly, to be successful. I want the things in front of me that I need so I can be successful. Adults want people to tell them they're doing a good job. Adults want to be recognized at least once a week for doing a good job. Adults, even though they're expected to work, want someone to tell them thank you. Adults like to have a supervisor who cares about them and pays attention to them. Adults like to have supervisors and other people that encourage them, that say you can do it, that work with them to be successful. Adults like to have a best friend. Now, adults like to feel that things are set up for them to be successful and their jobs are felt like this is important. So when these adults go to their job and say, so why are we doing this? They don't hear from their boss, because I said so. They say, because this is important that we do this, for that. They make sense of it. These people, the adults like to see the people around them also committed, that everybody's on the same page. We're trying to do something right. Adults like to feel like they're being successful, getting better, and adults like to feel like they have lots of opportunities to be successful. Why would our kids want anything different than we want when they go to school every day? The difference being our kids aren't paid for being at school, so they've already lost a lot of the reinforcement part. So how do we set schools up to look like good places of business? Those people that argue schools should run more like a business, okay, then we need to make sure that we reinforce, that we've set people up to do it the right way, we give them the right materials, that we're encouraging them, that we're giving them feedback. Good instruction, basically, is what we come right back to, is good instruction. I could take each one of these and flip it and say what this really is saying is it's a component of effective instruction. So how do we create instructional environments? Well, the PBS model says this. Let's start dealing with kid behaviors by looking at the entire school. And what we're going to do is we're going to get all of us together in that school and we're going to say, what should 2 plus 2 equal? And if we get to that point and you say 5 and you say 8 and you say 4 and you say 3 and you guys all argue and then you go away and say, I'm just going to teach you whatever I want, you will set your kids up to fail. If we all get together and say it's 4 and we all teach 4, the probability of our kids being successful dramatically increases. So, what do you want your kids to do in the cafeteria? What do you want them to do in the hallway? What do you want them to do in the restroom, at the bus stop, at the lockers, on the playground, wherever else they go? They need to know what it is you expect, and we all need to teach the same thing. Because if I say, get your feet off the furniture, and the next teacher says nothing to me at all, if I'm a kid, what I'm doing now is I'm thinking, which teachers let me put my feet on the furniture and which teachers don't? And the only way I'm going to figure it out is to test every one of you. So in other words, when you don't agree on the rules, you set kids up to fail. So we have to agree what the rules are. 2 plus 2 has to equal 4 everywhere you go. And when I walk out in the hall, I can't stop and think, is that a mean teacher or a nice teacher? When I walk out in the hall, I have to think, hallway means walk. If I start looking at every situation, what should my behavior be based upon what adult is there, I will make a lot of errors. But if I do it based on every adult here is going to say the same thing in this location. The rules have to be attached to locations, not to adults, except for classrooms. Kids are very capable of going into your classroom and saying, oh, Miss Davis, in here we're supposed to come in, sit down, get a paper, da-da-da-da. Bell rings, I go out, I come back. Miss Litterst. In this room, we get to hang out until she says sit down. And kids can go room to room and have no problem with that because it's consistent. Every single time I'm in this room, it's the same set of rules. Now I leave her room and walk out in the hallway. What's the rule? What should signal me the rule when I get to the hallway? The hallway, not the teacher. So I don't want to step out of her room and say, who's coming? Can I run? Oh, it's her. Yeah, I can run with her. She didn't care. And then the next day it's somebody I've never seen before. Can I run with her? It would be a damn shame to find out later that she was someone who allowed running and I didn't run, so I have to run and give it a shot. So we have to make sure that we are all on the same page, and there's the logic that we give people. If we all had a different answer for 2 plus 2, we wouldn't be teaching it very effectively. So what's our answer for the hallway? Not your classroom. Your classroom is your classroom. But the hallway, that belongs to all of us. And any place that belongs to all of us, we all need to decide, what is our expectation? We want you to walk, stay to the right, inside voice. Very simple, 3 things. Okay, then we all teach it to the kids, every one of us. We all remind kids all the time. We're out in the hall and we say, what are you guys supposed to do out here? Excellent, great job guys, appreciate it. We continue to teach it, to facilitate it with reminding them. We do this across every adult in the school. When kids are doing it right, we always say, good job kids, thanks. And when they're doing it wrong, we say, stop. What's the rule in the hall? So what were you doing wrong? So how would that be better? Could you go back there and come back and show me how to do it the right way? And when they do that, we Thanks. And what if you do that to a kid every single day and they still keep doing it? Then I'm going to say, what we've got here is a kid that's not a green zone kid. That's a kid for whom school-wide rules don't work. And what do we do for kids that are yellow and red? Something different. So for that kid, we say, you know what? We'll get a different plan for you now. If you walk, this happens, but if you don't walk, we have a different punishment that's a little bigger. So we've played with it. And I'm going to have an extra adult standing wherever you are to make it more likely that we remind you. We're going to set up a plan. But let's say we do this school-wide. We figured out school-wide that if anybody uses this door, they get in trouble. They go back here, they smoke, they fight, they vandalize, they fall, So we decided the rule for the school is we all use those doors, not these doors. So I'll teach it to everybody. Listen up, everyone. Here's your school-wide rule. The school rule is, in order to make sure you're safe, you always use those doors. We don't use this door, only those. Got it? Great. Now I'll predict, if I just taught it like that 80% of you will say whatever and you'll use those doors. But I'm going to guess that Terry was wearing her iPod while I was saying that. Didn't get any of this. Bonnie wasn't listening at all. She was thinking about something 100 miles away. These two people were talking to each other, weren't paying attention. Amy heard me but has since forgotten. And then we've got a couple people here that heard me, understood it, remember it, and just don't care. Or purposely want to do the exact opposite of what I just said. What I have to figure out is, how do I prevent across all of these kids? If I know 10 to 15% are going to fail, what extra could I do? I'm sorry?
Giving an example, stand in front of the door.
Okay, so something extra I could do. Now, do you need that? No, and neither do you, and neither do all of you, but you guys do. It isn't going to work for them, but I don't know who they are. They're mixed in out there. So tomorrow I stand by the door. Here's my question to you about standing by this door. Is this the simplest possible thing I could do? I'm starting to feel already like I'm tired of standing here. This is very logical. Is there something even more realistic that's logical? Okay, we put a big, huge sign on this door, blinking neon lights that says, stop, don't use this door, go through that door. Okay, now that's really simple. If we take the neon lights away, it's basically a piece of paper with colored markers. I put that thing up there. I'm going to say that that is really for 10% of you. It's not for these two kids. But again, you guys are all mixed in out there. I don't know who's who, so what I do is I put this in place, and then we sit back and we say, what's going on? I'm hoping